This lesson was sponsored by Dr. Johan McFarlane. Thank you for your contribution to Thuma Mina Teaching. Welcome to Thuma Mina Teaching. This is your final lesson for Term 2, History, Grade 9. In this lesson, we are going to discuss stories of the Cold War, and we're going to specifically look at stories that happened in Berlin during the Cold War. So where are we? Europe was divided, Germany was divided, and Berlin was divided by the Cold War. East versus West, communism versus capitalism. And many people wanted to move from the east to the west, specifically in Berlin, from the eastern side to the western side. If you want to know why they wanted to move, look at lesson 6 again, where I discuss it in more detail. From 1945 to 1961, it was relatively easy for people to move from the eastern side to the western side of Berlin. But everything changed when that wall was erected. At the beginning, it was still quite easy in 1961 when there was only a barbed wire. People were able to cross over, and when the wall was erected, people went to buildings that were close to the wall and jumped out of the window into the more free Western Berlin. But these easy methods stopped quickly when the Soviet Union intervened and tried to stop all the easy ways of exiting Eastern Berlin. From that point forward, you had to risk your life if you wanted to flee East Berlin into West Berlin. And these are the stories of the people who managed to do so. I would also like to mention here, it started with a wall, but it became more militarized. And as it became more dangerous, people's attempts to escape East Berlin became more creative and more daring. Let's start with a couple of stories that happened at the checkpoints. Now first, what were the checkpoints? The checkpoints were places within the Berlin Wall where people were allowed to cross from east to west and from west to east. But not any person was allowed to do so. Only if you had a very special passport you were allowed to cross, like diplomats and high-ranking officials. The most famous of these checkpoints by far is Checkpoint Charlie. Checkpoint Charlie is also the place where the standoff happened in 1961 when the tanks of the Soviet Union faced the tanks of America, and they had a standoff for about 16 hours. A very tense time between the two nations. But let's get back to the stories. At these checkpoints, people frequently changed cars and transformed cars so that people were able to be smuggled through to the other side. And how did they do it? Let's look at these examples. The Trojan Mini. This little car was transformed. They took the inside of the seat out, and so they put a person within the seat and they smuggled the person through the checkpoint. And then the next car, this small BMW, is so small the person who owned the BMW argued that there's no chance that a border control guard would even check this car, because how could somebody even fit? And the person was seated within the exhaust of the car. And then the following example is also quite creative. This person took a surfboard and he made it hollow on the inside in such a way that a person could lie within the surfboard and put it on top of the car, and hopefully the border control guard will not search a surfboard for a person inside. And then Heinz Meixner did quite a 007 move. He took a car, a convertible car, put his fiancée in the back seat of the car, and his fiancée's mother, so his mother-in-law to be, he put in the boot of the car, and he took out the front windscreen and deflated the tire so it could be very low. And then he rushed through the checkpoint, because the checkpoints had these booms. And what he did is he rushed underneath the boom so that the border guards would not be able to stop him. And then one of my favorites, Wolfgang Engels, very creative and daring person. What he did is he befriended the guards, and especially the guards who owned a type of tank vehicle or armored vehicle. He asked them, hey, how does this car work? And he managed to actually have a quick driving lesson just for the fun of it. And they thought it was innocent, the border guards. But when they went on their lunch break, he climbed into the armored vehicle and he rushed to the wall, hoping to break through the wall. He didn't manage to go completely through the wall, and he had to climb out, and he climbed out the wrong side of the wall. Then the border guards started to open fire on him. He got shot twice, but he still managed to get through the wall, and he managed to reach West Berlin. And then, of course, tunnels. Many tunnels were built during the Cold War period in Berlin, but these tunnels were unfortunately more unsuccessful than they were successful. Only 300 people escaped through tunnels during the whole period of the Cold War. I would like to share two stories. Tunnel 57 started with Joachim Newman. What he did is he got hold of a special passport that he actually borrowed, probably a bit forged, and managed to get through the border control to the western side. Leaving his girlfriend behind on the eastern side and his friends, he made a promise that he will make a way for them to get to the eastern side. He then gathered some student friends over time on the western side, and they started digging from the west to the east. The first tunnel was flooded, it was unsuccessful. Then they built a second tunnel, and this tunnel was discovered by the Eastern Border Guards, their intelligence. So the second time also failed. But the third time, they managed to get to the eastern side, and many people were able to be freed through that tunnel. Unfortunately, it's difficult to let people know from the eastern side that there's a tunnel because there were undercover police everywhere. But 57 people escaped, and that was the largest amount of people that escaped through one tunnel. Then the following tunnel is Tunnel 29. Tunnel 29 is an extraordinary story, very interesting story, so much so that they might make a series on this story. The same people who created Chernobyl is possibly going to make a series on Tunnel 29, so look out for that. If you're a history junkie, go to BBC and type in Tunnel 29. There are a couple of podcasts on this story, and there's also a whole article. I don't want to give any spoilers, but it is a very, very interesting story if you want to take the time to go check it out. Besides the escape attempts through the checkpoints and through the tunnels, there were other people who were very creative and daring through other means of escape. Let's start with the hot air balloon. There were two couples that decided to make a homemade hot air balloon. Quite daring. What they did is they took bedding and they would knit the bedding together so that it would form a massive hot air balloon. And then they made a machine to produce hot air so that it will fly. And they were actually able to cross over from east to west after two failed attempts. There's actually a movie made about this called The Night Crossing. The next story is also very interesting. Harry Detterling escaped via train. He noticed that there is one train track that goes from east to west Berlin, obviously covered by fences and not used at all. Then he decided to become a train driver, and he made sure that he will be placed close to that track. And then he arranged to change the track to that old track that is not used, and he got his family and his friends on the train, and he went full steam through the armed border, and he called the train the last train to freedom. There's also a movie made about this escape, Durchbruch, Lok 234. And then my favorite story is about three brothers called Ingo, Holger, and Egbert. The first brother, Ingo, became a border guard for the Eastern regime. Being a border guard, he was able to get close to the wall. This happened when it wasn't that militarized. He crossed through from the east to west through a little hole in the wall, and with the help of a friend, he managed to get to the western side. But his two other brothers were still on the eastern side. 8 years later, his older brother, Holger, decided to become good at archery. And so he practiced his archery on the eastern side. And then one day he took his bow and shot an arrow from the eastern side into the western side over the border, and his brother was waiting on the other side. And then they connected a cable with the arrow and connected it to another cable, went to a high building, and he actually zip-lined into the western side and managed to escape. At this stage, two brothers were on the western side, but the youngest brother, Egbert, was still on the eastern side. They decided to become pilots, the older two brothers. So they took two planes and they painted the plane so that it will look like a military plane of the Eastern Berlin. They even put that star on, it looked like a communist plane. Both brothers flew with their planes over to the eastern side. One plane circled above and checked if the coast is clear, and the other plane landed. The brother then jumped into the plane, and the plane went back to the western side of Berlin. After 15 years, all three brothers were reunited again. One trapeze artist managed to climb up an electrical pole, and he went over the border on an electrical wire. It was very dangerous because he could get shocked, but it was also very cold. And when he reached the other side, his fingers weren't able to hold on anymore because it was too cold, and he actually fell to the ground. He wasn't conscious anymore, but when he woke up, he was in the free western side of Berlin. Another story is parents who swam through a river pushing their 3-year-old in a bathtub to get to the western side. If you're ever lucky enough to visit Berlin, make sure you go to Checkpoint Charlie. It's still there, obviously not operational anymore, but it is a memorial. And next to Checkpoint Charlie, there's the Mauer Museum. There are loads of stories within that museum. In 1989, people just moved from Eastern Berlin to Western Berlin by the hundreds, just crossed through the borders as the Soviet Union started to lose control over not only Eastern Berlin, but over many countries that they previously controlled. And in 1991, the Soviet Union completely disintegrated, and it was the end of that era. So that marks the end of Term 2 History, Grade 9. I hope you enjoyed it. I don't have a class anymore in front of me, but I would love to know how was your experience. Give me some feedback. Did you learn a lot? Did this method of learning help you as a student a lot? I really do hope so. So feel free to leave some comments in the comment area. To give some feedback, that would be appreciated. I really hope that we can continue with these lessons in Term 3 and Term 4. It depends on funding availability, but I sure do hope that it will happen. All the best from my side, especially in these COVID times. Stay safe and remember to keep on learning. Our dream here at Thuma Mina Teaching is to produce quality CAPS-aligned lessons and to distribute them free of charge to whoever needs them. Learners, we hope that this resource can help you with preparation and revision, and teachers, we hope that this can be a useful tool in your classroom. If anyone would like to partner with us in this endeavor, there are 3 ways that you can help. Firstly, help us to spread the resource so that more people can use it. Secondly, the production and editing is quite expensive, so if you have the capacity, please consider donating to our BackerBuddy site in the description below. Lastly, if you're a business, your contribution could mean a lot to many learners. If your business chooses to sponsor a lesson, we would like to acknowledge you as the donor of that lesson at the beginning of the sponsored lesson. Thuma Mina Teaching is a non-profit company, and we are committed to make these lessons available free of charge.